These are the stories we share around the dinner table, tell in front of the campfire, and listen to on our porch. This is a place where tales are told and stories are heard. Grab your tea, your cocoa, your whiskey, your wine. Welcome to the Storytellers Porch with your host, Jill Davis.
Welcome to the Storytellers Porch. This week's guest is writer, friend, and my cousin, Sume. Welcome to our first guest storyteller podcast. Sue, I'm so glad you're here.
Jill, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
It's awfully fun to get to connect like this. And I know that we are, states apart, so it feels like we're worlds apart almost. But I have a feeling you have your drink on the porch today. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking premium Irish.
So in my Irish world, that would be whiskey. Are you drinking whiskey this early in the morning?
Not today. I'm drinking premium Irish tea. That's my new addiction.
It's funny how we all have our comfort drinks, isn't it? And that kind of goes with the concept of our stories today, of the things that are important in our world and how they impact our life. We chose today, the first guest storyteller podcast, for you to be on, Sue, because both of us really believe in the power of story. And not just because it can have an impact on the world, but because it makes us feel good, because it's a comfort, like our tea and sometimes our whiskey or our wine, or even our hot cocoa. So while we're getting ready to talk about your story that you're going to share, I'd like to talk just a little bit for our audience about why story is so important to both of us. So tell me a little bit about story in your life.
Stories are in my bones. I was raised on story. I grew up in rural Washington. And that was back in the day before the internet. It was back in the day. We had a black and white television. We had antenna TV. We didn't have a lot of electronic distractions. So my mom would tell us stories.
I remember a lot of your mom, and I just want to say your mom's name because, as we know, names are important. And so her name was Nova Leathers Mullins, and your mother and my mother shared the same maiden name. And when I was growing up, I grew up in a very different environment. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in the middle of a city with all of the distractions and not quite as many stories. But when I would come to Washington State in the summer, the four of us, meaning you, your sister, your mom, and I, would pile onto this full-size bed. I don't know how we all fit on it. And we would lie there and have your mother tell us stories. So help me remember just a little bit about how your mom used story in your life.
When we were a kid, I think she used them as a defense mechanism. She would tell us stories until we finally fell asleep, thank God. And as a parent, I can really relate to that. She used stories to entertain us in the car. She used them to share family history. And one of the things about our family is she would tell me the story also of your mom because I'm her namesake. My mom, Nova, named me Sue after her sister, Sue. So stories have always been a part of my family legacy.
And I think it helps too, as we get older, we have discussed this at other times, that as you and I discuss our stories now of our childhood or of the stories your mom told us, it gives us more of an understanding of who they were and who in turn it has created us to be. Part of the goal for the Storytellers Porch is that, yes, our stories are personal, but they have community impact. And when you and I talk about our moms, we almost always find something that's relatable to us or to people in our world or just to the world in general. And one of my favorite things that you say, which is going to take us into the first story you're going to tell us today, is that the stories that you tell, although you're more of a writer than a teller, so thank you for being willing to tell one of your written stories today, or a couple of them, you always tell me stories that you write are always true, but not always factual. Can you tell me a little bit more of what that means to you?
Yes. In this story, the first story I'm going to read today, the story is 100% true. It's made up of lots and lots of facts. They are family facts, though. They're not necessarily this one time. They are stories are, to me, are kind of a conglomeration. We can have factual stories that are true, and we can have true stories that aren't exactly factual. They're based on facts and they're made up of facts, but there's a creativity that goes along with a good story.
I agree. I think that is just so true. And I do think it's important that they are true, because we can, not always, but in our podcast, that they are true, because that allows us to really be, as we say, every man's story, because our stories are everyone's stories. And with that, Sue, I'd love for you to share your first story today.
Okay. This story is called Baggage. His bags were packed and sitting by the front door. Well, maybe not bags so much as a Godzilla backpack and a worn-out stuffed lamb that no longer played "Mary Had a Lip" when you wound the key. Not traditional bags in the least, but they contained most of what he valued in this world and planned to take with him when he left me. He had packed his extra tails, actually a pair of bootlaces from an old pair of snowboard boots, but when tucked into the back of his underoos, made a fine tail. He had packed several pairs of the aforementioned underoos, known as big boy pants, a family of plastic dinosaurs, a handful of random Legos that may or may not have been included intentionally, but were instead relics from an earlier, happier time. And he had packed the wooden engine from his train set. He had included none of the multitude of track pieces his grandma had given him for his birthday, imagining perhaps that he'd pick them up at a toy store somewhere out on the open road. "Do you have time for a sandwich before you go?" I asked him. He shook his head without answering and stuck his bottom lip out. He better hope a bird doesn't come along and poop on it, I thought, the old warning from my childhood rising up to sit on the tip of my tongue. But I did not say it, just kept my face solemn and nodded. "Okay," I said. "Well, I guess you better get going then. You might want your raincoat. It looks like rain." He stared at me, jutting lower lip, big brown eyes under crabby, drawn together brows. I offered, "you could wait until your brothers wake up from their naps. I bet they would like to say goodbye to you." I thought he would waver then, that his 3-year-old's resolve would crack and he would abandon his running away, unpack his treasures, and maybe have that sandwich after all. But as small as he was made up mostly of stubborn. So I helped him fasten up his red raincoat and put on his backpack. I opened the door. "You didn't tie on my cape." I looked down at him. "You're right." I got his tattered, former favorite blankie-turned superhero cape and tied it loosely around his neck. Only babies had blankies. 3-year-olds had multi-purpose capes, good for both adventure and nap time. Even superheroes get tired. "Okay," I said. "See you later, alligator." But my alligator didn't after a while crocodile me back. So I just said, "I love you," and shut the door. Then I went to call my mom and tell her that her curse had worked. I had a child just as stubborn as myself, and would she please keep an eye out? Her oldest grandchild was headed across our lawn to hers, running away from home, and I hoped she was happy. Judging by the laughter that erupted from the receiver, I would say she was. "Did you help him pack?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "Isn't that what you did for me?" "Yes," she said, still laughing. "But you decided to wait to leave until Daddy got home." "Well, not this one," I said. "Oops, gotta go. Someone's at my door." She laughed and hung up. I don't really remember how we patched things up, my son and I, but we did. Our runaway bunny came home, reconciled but not repentant. Sure, he had had the last word in running away. But a mother's revenge is a slow and patient thing. And there is a curse out there with my son's name on it. A curse, or maybe it's a prayer after all, a prayer that someday, God willing, he will have a child as beautiful and strong-willed as he is. And I plan to laugh myself silly when it happens.
I just love that story. And for so many reasons, one of them being simply that it is a story that we can all relate to. You know, even though I'm not 3 years old anymore, there are times I'd like to run away and I wish somebody would just help me do that. But it's also about parenting.
Yes. Parenting is, it's laughter and tears and a lot of work and a miraculous thing to get to do. One of the things I found out about parenting is as soon as I got really good at parenting an infant, my child would change. And then I had a toddler. And as soon as I nailed those toddler skills, they switched and I had a junior high kid. And no matter what I did, my skills instantly became obsolete. So there was a lot of learning that goes along, and a lot of I think a lot of loss sometimes, because we lose touch with that infant, with that toddler, as our children progress from stage to stage.
And I fully believe that the reward of learning all of those stages is grandparenting. And I know that you get that. But you're right, along with parenting. And it's really anything we do in life, I think, because I'm thinking about like learning a new job or going to college. You learn how to be a freshman, and then you learn how to be a sophomore, and you learn how to do the first part of your job, and then you learn how to do the last part of your job. And there's always, with growth comes loss. I know that that's a little bit about what your next story is on, Sue. So thank you for sharing that story with us as well.
This one is called Sears Portraits. I took them down last week, pulled out the picture hangers and spackled over the holes. New paint would freshen up the place, give new life to old walls. Perhaps it would resurrect something in me as well. The old paint was chipped and scarred, too many corners cut, too much jostling and horseplay. And there is a limit to how much boy grime you can scrub from your walls until the paint comes off with it. Life is a dirty business. The paint color is scrawled across the top of the can. Log cabin, it reads, but my husband calls it depression brown. The wet paint looks like melted chocolate, and stirring the paint stick around and around, only the smell of it stops me from dipping a quick fingerful into my mouth. To me, painting has always been a Zen-like experience. No thoughts, just the smooth rolling on of paint, the covering of old sins, the up and down of the roller as soothing as all those nights spent rocking, rocking, rocking. The original color of these walls was wheatgrass. It was the pale color of new sprouts, neither light green nor yellow-white, but somewhere in between. It was a color you would expect to find if you lifted a temporary object from your lawn, a kiddie pool, a slip and slide. The grass beneath would be bent and pale and seem tender, somehow more fragile than the other greener grass. Some days, when the roller is too fast and the walls too few, I switch to a trim brush, its 3-inch width more manageable somehow. My wall area to brush ratio feels right, and I am zen again. The pictures are stacked face down in the now spare room. I will paint that room last, I think. I haven't decided on a color yet. Who names the colors, I wonder? Who decides that blue is called Forgotten Secret, or that lilac shouldn't be called lilac, but children's laughter? Sometimes, even a 3-inch brush feels too reckless, and I search my desk until I find an abandoned artist brush. Only an inch wide, the paint will go on the walls at a more measured pace. I feel my heart racing then calm, my breathing slow with the narrow, careful strokes. I took them down, the pictures, and stacked them away, faces to the wall, baby faces from long ago, and now so far away. Their childhood was another country, and now its borders are forever closed to me, barbed wire strung across my heart. Every night I would pass the pictures of those faces on my way to bed. Fat baby cheeks and dimpled fists, hair that looked like dandelion gone to seed, and I would close my eyes and make a wish, a prayer. Those faces followed me each night, through sleep and down into my dreams. Sometimes the faces are full of gap-toothed grins. Sometimes they are still and mock stern. I can never remember the dreams, but when I wake, my throat is clogged and my body is heavy, as though the insides had been scooped out and refilled with stones. I press my fingers to sternum, to breastbone, expecting to feel the raised round welt of scar tissue. But no matter how firmly I press, I feel nothing. Days I move from room to room, never settling for long, restless, too weary to be agitated. What is the color of purpose, I wonder? Does it share card space with resolve? Is it a pale orange warmed with pink? A solid, mid-toned gray flecked like granite? I took them down, 18 portraits, one for each year, and stacked them. Doing this, I am reminded of time out, of sitting on the naughty step, of standing in a corner waiting for punishment to be over. So many things are over now, and some will never be over. I took them down last week. New paint will freshen up the place, give new life to old walls. Perhaps it will resurrect something in me as well, Lazarus with a paintbrush.
Sue, that is so beautiful. I'm almost like, I just want to let it sit there and resonate for a while, because there's so much truth and wisdom in that. In all that we lose, there's memories and there's hope and there's love.
Sometimes loss and gain are so tightly entwined, it's hard to tell them apart.
Yes. I think we need to make that as a quote on Goodreads or somewhere. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today, for bringing your Irish with you, and for sharing a bit of your heart and your life in a way that is personal, but has community impact. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Jill.
The stories that we share here on the porch are personal and have community impact. Sue's story, a story of parenting, of love and loss, also has community impact. I'm recording this in 2021, and so many of us experienced great loss in 2020 and 2021. Loss of people, loss of dreams, loss of finances, sometimes loss of hope. So I'm so grateful for the reminder that Sue shared with us today that hope and love are always present. Philip Pullman, author of one of my favorite stories, The Golden Compass, says, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. I'm glad you came to listen to a story today. Here at the Storytellers Porch, we believe we are the stories we share. Keep living your story and meet us next time here on the porch. And don't forget your favorite beverage.
To learn more about our storytellers and our host, Jill Davis, you can find their bios and their social media links at thestorytellersporch.com. To make sure you hear every story with us on the porch, follow us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher, and wherever you hear your favorite shows. We'll see you next time here on the porch, where I'll be drinking some iced coffee and cream. What drink will you bring?